The silence was thick, too thick. It wrapped around the walled settlement like a fog no breeze could lift. For most, it was comforting, a break from the screaming chaos of the world beyond. But for Lena, silence meant something else. It meant waiting. It meant wondering what had changed out there, beyond the concrete barriers and reinforced steel gates. It had been 3 years since the last breach. The walls, 20 feet tall and lined with barbed wire, surrounded what was once a suburban university campus. Now, it was known only as the Dream, a place where the living still dared to plan, still dared to hope. Lena, a scout and former paramedic, stood on the eastern watchtower just before dawn. Her hand gripped her binoculars, her eyes scanning the horizon. The morning fog made it hard to see more than a few dozen meters past the outer fencing. She liked it better that way, out of sight, out of mind. The infected, known as Hollow Ones by most survivors, hadn't been seen for days. But that never meant they were gone. Behind her, the settlement stirred to life. Fires lit in metal drums, warm water boiled in large shared pots, and children's voices echoed in muffled tones. That was the strangest thing about the Dream, children laughing. Most outposts had long since forgotten such sounds. "Lena," came a voice from the stairwell below. It was Simon, her watch partner, carrying a metal thermos and 2 tin cups. "Figured you'd be up here again." "I didn't sleep," she replied without turning. "Not a good feeling in my gut." Simon sighed, pouring coffee into the cups. "You always say that before something bad happens." "And I'm usually right," she said, accepting the cup. They sipped in silence. Below them, guards rotated shifts and the agricultural teams moved toward the greenhouse. Solar panels lined the tops of former dorm buildings, while the old science labs had been converted into water filtration rooms. The community had structure, rhythm, and order, a rarity in the post-outbreak world. Suddenly, the calm was broken by a faint sound, a tapping. Not from within, but beyond the wall. Lena froze. "You hear that?" Simon nodded slowly, setting his cup down. "Metal on stone?" They pressed their ears toward the concrete, listening again. Tap. Tap. Pause. Tap. Lena leaned into the radio clipped to her belt. North wall. Possible contact. Not moving in, just tapping. A voice crackled in response. "Copy that. Stay alert. Sending a team to reinforce your position." Simon reached for the mounted floodlight switch. "Should I?" "Not yet," Lena whispered. "If it's one of them, they're testing us. If it's not." A louder sound interrupted her, 3 solid knocks. Then silence. Both of them stepped back from the wall. "What the hell was that?" Simon asked. "I don't know. But it wasn't random. That was a pattern." Within minutes, 2 more guards arrived. One of them, Jericho, an older ex-cop with a scar over his left eye, studied the wall intently. "You sure it wasn't just wind? Fallen debris?" Lena shook her head. "It was deliberate. Rhythmic. Like someone trying to talk." "Talk?" Jericho scoffed. "Unless the Hollow Ones learned Morse code, I doubt that." Lena looked him dead in the eyes. "That's what I'm saying. I don't think it was one of them." Now the tension in the air thickened. For years, the Dream had operated under the assumption that no other safe communities remained within 50 miles. Every group sent beyond the wall had either returned with empty hands, or not returned at all. "We'll log it, triple patrol the sector, and notify the council," Jericho said, already turning to leave. "In the meantime, nobody opens anything without authorization." Lena stayed behind as the others descended the tower. She stared at the wall, heart racing. She had seen enough of the infected to know how they moved. Mindless. Fast. Brutal. This was something else. Could there be others out there? Survivors? A signal? Or a trap? As the sun broke through the fog and poured golden light over the dream, Lena couldn't shake the chill in her bones. For the first time in years, the silence didn't feel safe, it felt like a question waiting to be answered. And Lena knew, whether the council allowed it or not, she'd have to be the one to find that answer. Because if someone was still out there, knocking on their wall, it meant the world wasn't as dead as they thought. It meant the silence had been lying all along. The council convened at noon. They gathered in what used to be the student union, a hollowed-out hall now filled with salvaged tables, hand-drawn maps, and guarded optimism. At the head of the table sat Mara, the elected leader of the dream. Her dark eyes scanned the reports while a map of the surrounding wasteland lay unfurled in front of her. Lena stood at attention, trying to keep her voice calm. 3 taps. A pause. Then 3 more. I've heard hollow ones groan, scream, even scratch, but this was different. It sounded organized. And the others heard it too? Mara asked. Yes, Lena confirmed. Simon, Jericho, and the reinforcements. Council member Elijah, a former professor and the oldest member of the group, leaned forward. Could it be a survivor? Maybe from the southern corridor we abandoned last year? We swept that zone thoroughly, Mara replied, her tone cautious. But I won't dismiss the possibility. A murmur passed through the room. The council rarely agreed on anything quickly, but anything that suggested intelligent life outside the walls, that was worth debating. Lena's eyes remained locked on the map. The world beyond the dream was a tangle of collapsed towns, dead forests, and dust-choked highways. But to the east, where the knocking came from, there were no known structures. Just a stretch of ground called the Silence Belt, where no signals, radio frequencies, or signs of life had ever been detected. A dead zone in every sense of the word. I want to go out there, Lena said suddenly. The room fell quiet. Mara looked up. You want to breach the wall? Not breach. Scout, Lena clarified. Give me one partner. Light gear. In and out. If it's something dangerous, I'll report it. If it's a survivor, we may not get another chance. Elijah tapped a pen nervously on the table. If this is a trap, you won't even have time to radio in. The hollow ones could be learning. Mimicking us. Then we need to know that too, Lena replied. Mara considered the weight of the choice. Finally, she nodded. You leave at dawn. You have until nightfall to return. No heroics. Lena nodded. I understand. By evening, preparations were underway. Lena sat outside the greenhouse where the air smelled faintly of damp earth and mint. She was cleaning her blade, a machete shortened to fit her backpack, when Simon approached. I heard, he said, tossing a small bundle her way. Dried beans. Some jerky. And a flare. Thanks, she replied without looking up. You know you're not going to find anything out there, right? He said, trying to keep his voice light. Just rocks. Maybe a squirrel pretending to be polite. Lena smirked. That'd be the most intelligent thing I've seen outside the wall in years. But the truth was, she was nervous. This wasn't like their usual resource runs or salvage missions. The Silence Belt had always been avoided for a reason. Nothing ever came back from there, not scouts, not drones, not signals. Simon sat beside her. I know I can't talk you out of it. Nope. But I can ask to go with you. You can ask. He waited. Lena finally glanced over. Okay. But only if you keep quiet when I tell you to. I don't want to die because your boots crunch too loud. Simon grinned. Deal. That night, Lena couldn't sleep. Her dreams were filled with strange sounds, clicking, tapping, voices without faces whispering just outside the walls. In one dream, she stood at the very edge of the dream's defenses, and when she stepped outside, the world beyond wasn't ruined. It was alive. Not with people, but with something else, something waiting. She woke up before dawn, sweating. As the gate opened the next morning, only a few were awake to see them off. Mara stood near the control panel, her arms crossed. "Remember," she warned, "if you see anything strange, don't engage. Watch. Record. Return." Lena nodded. "Copy that." Then, with a groan of metal, the outer gate slid open. The silence belt lay ahead, rolling hills covered in fog, collapsed power lines, and crumbled asphalt that looked like ancient scars. No birds. No wind. Just stillness. They stepped into it. Within 10 minutes, the wall was no longer visible behind them. 30 minutes later, their radios began to crackle. At the 1-hour mark, the signal was dead. Simon glanced over. "Still think this is a good idea?" "I didn't say it was a good idea," Lena muttered. "I said it was necessary." They climbed over a small ridge and froze. A symbol had been carved into the dirt. A large circle with 3 lines running through it, fresh, deliberate. Lena crouched beside it, fingers brushing the grooves. "This was made recently." Simon turned. "That's not the worst part." She followed his gaze, and there, in the distance, stood a figure. Not a hollow one. Not staggering. Not groaning. Still. Watching. Waiting. The silence, it turned out, was far from empty. The figure stood motionless, partially obscured by the swirling mist. A silhouette wrapped in rags, thin, upright, and eerily quiet. Lena's heart pounded so hard she could hear the blood rushing in her ears. Her hand instinctively moved toward her weapon, but she didn't draw it. Simon whispered, "Is it one of them?" Lena narrowed her eyes. The figure wasn't swaying, wasn't snarling or twitching. It didn't exhibit the erratic movements of a hollow one. No, the stance was human. A survivor, maybe. Or something worse. "We don't know yet," Lena murmured, crouching lower. No sudden moves. The fog rolled between them in waves. For a moment, the figure disappeared entirely. Then it stepped to the side, slowly. Deliberately. Not approaching. Not fleeing. Just watching. Then, just as silently as it had come, it turned and slipped into the fog. Lena stood quickly. "Come on. We follow." Simon hesitated. "Are you sure? If that's a person, they know something. They're not infected." "Not yet." "And if it's bait?" "Then we find out how dangerous the trap is." They pushed forward carefully, navigating cracked asphalt and overgrown weeds. The air was still too quiet. No insects. No birds. Just the soft thud of their boots and the whisper of fog against their clothes. They passed another symbol in the dirt, same as before. A circle with 3 lines. And beside it, footprints. Fresh ones. They followed them. 10 minutes deeper into the belt, the world began to shift. What looked like crumbled ruins rose from the mist, a forgotten outpost of some kind, its buildings long devoured by time. A gas station half swallowed by trees. A pickup truck rusted to the core. Everything looked untouched for years, except for the writing. Painted across the gas station's outer wall, in bold black letters, were the words. "They don't see US when we're quiet." Simon read it aloud, barely above a whisper. "What does that mean?" Lena ran her fingers over the dried paint. "Someone's been here. Recently." Just then, a soft click echoed from behind them. Lena spun around. The figure stood less than 20 feet away now, partially masked by a broken sign. Their face was obscured by a dirty cloth wrap, and they held a wooden staff tipped with a jagged metal shard, but it wasn't raised. "Don't move," Lena said, raising a hand calmly. "We're not here to fight." The figure tilted its head slightly. "We're from the settlement west of the wall," Lena continued. "We heard tapping. We followed the sound." Still no response. But the figure slowly raised one hand. Then pointed, to the symbol on the wall. Then to the sky. And then vanished into the fog again. Lena and Simon rushed after them, turning the corner, only to find nothing. Just emptiness and footprints leading deeper into a narrow alley between collapsed buildings. Simon exhaled sharply. "This is insane." "No. This is a message." Lena knelt, examining the footprints again. The person had moved with purpose, avoiding noise, skirting gravel and glass. "Whoever they are," she said, "they're not just surviving out here. They're adapting. Hiding from something. But from what?" Lena glanced back at the message. "They don't see us when we're quiet." She didn't like the implications. They pressed onward, following the trail until they reached the center of what had once been a plaza. It was a ruin now, littered with debris and shadows, but in the middle stood a tall, rusted radio tower. The kind built for local broadcasting. It looked long abandoned. But there were signs of life, fresh rope holding one side in place, a tarp half camouflaged among the branches above, and a lantern. Dimly glowing. Someone had lit it. Simon stepped toward the base of the tower. "They've been living here." Lena crouched beside an overturned crate. Inside were food wrappers, water bottles, and a journal wrapped in plastic. She opened it carefully. The first page was smeared and torn. But the second held a sentence, neatly written in ink. "We learned how to vanish. It's the only way to stay alive." Then a second line. "They took voices first. Then faces." Lena's stomach tightened. Simon looked over her shoulder. "Took faces?" A sound snapped through the air, metal on metal. A signal? A trap? They both ducked behind cover, weapons drawn. Footsteps echoed from the north. Not fast. But not slow either. And more than one set. Lena raised her radio to call for backup, and remembered the signal was dead out here. She met Simon's eyes. Then came a whisper. Not from a person, but from everywhere. A voice that didn't echo from a mouth, but drifted through the fog like it had no source at all. "Go back." Simon froze. "Did you?" "Yes," Lena breathed. "But I don't know who said it. Or what. Go back." The words didn't come from ahead or behind, they came from everywhere. Carried on the air like the breath of something too old to be human. The fog thickened as if reacting to the command, swirling low across the plaza, curling around Lena's boots like fingers. Simon's voice was barely a whisper. "We shouldn't be here." Lena nodded once, then rose slowly, tucking the journal into her bag. "We're leaving. We'll come back with a team, full equipment, and backup if it's real." They moved carefully, retracing their steps. The footprints they'd followed had already begun to blur in the mist. The dirt shifted. The silence didn't just feel like absence now, it felt like it was watching. Halfway back toward the main road, Lena froze. The symbol had changed. The once simple circle with 3 lines had been added to, more lines, extending like arms. A crude face had been drawn above it. Hollow eyes. A wide, curved mouth. A mockery of a smile. Lena crouched. This wasn't here before. Simon turned slowly, eyes scanning the mist. "What does it mean?" "I think it means we were seen." Suddenly, something rustled to their left. A figure bolted across the road, too fast to identify. Lena raised her blade, heart thumping. But there was no attack. Just movement. Darting. Watching. Then another shape. This one farther away. Then another. Always on the edge of visibility. "They're circling us," Simon muttered, gripping his staff tightly. "No," Lena whispered. "They're hurting us." The road narrowed ahead. Flanked on both sides by collapsed houses and burnt-out vehicles, it was the perfect place for an ambush. Lena grabbed Simon's arm. "New route. That alley." They darted left, slipping between two leaning walls and ducking beneath a cracked support beam. The fog thinned slightly in the alley, enough to make out shapes. They pressed forward, passing shattered windows, broken doll heads, rusted tools. Silent memories of the world before. Then they saw it. A door, intact. Steel. Reinforced. Marked with the symbol again. Only this time, someone had scrawled a word beneath it in thick red paint. "Remember." Lena paused. "This is a shelter." Simon tested the handle. It gave with a soft creak. "We going in?" Lena hesitated. Then nodded. "It's better than being out here." Inside, the world changed. The silence outside had been heavy, unnatural. But within these walls, it was almost peaceful. Dust hung in shafts of dim light. Crates lined the walls, many cracked open and empty. Mismatched furniture suggested someone had lived here for a long time. Lena swept her flashlight across the room. On one wall was a map, hand-drawn and stitched together from scraps. It showed the dream's location, nearby ruins, and black circles around specific areas labeled, "No Echo," "Vanished," and "Still Watching." Beneath the map, more writing. Rambling. Nervous. One phrase repeated over and over. "We stayed quiet. We stayed alive." And then a final note in the corner. "Don't follow their voices. They speak like us, but they're not." Simon's mouth went dry. "What are they talking about?" Lena whispered, "Mimics." Simon turned sharply. "You think the infected have evolved?" "I don't know," she admitted. "But we heard a voice earlier, and it didn't have a body." They backed away from the wall slowly, eyes flicking toward the dark corners of the shelter. A sound echoed behind them, a soft click. Then another. Footsteps. 2. Then 4. Lena extinguished the flashlight instantly. Down. Quiet. They crouched low behind a crate as the door creaked open again. Something entered. No words. No sounds beyond the shuffle of movement and the soft inhale, like breathing that wasn't quite right. The thing paused. Turned. Moved toward the far wall, where the map hung. Lena risked a glance. What she saw wasn't a hollow one. It looked human, at first. But its limbs moved too smoothly. It didn't blink. It stared at the writing on the wall like it was studying a foreign language. Then, slowly, it began to hum. Simon's eyes widened. It was humming a lullaby. A real one. The same one children in the dream sang at night before lights out. Lena felt the blood drain from her face. The creature stopped. Turned toward their hiding spot. Lena held her breath. Then, 3 slow knocks on the floor. Tap. 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 And it spoke. Go back. But this time, Lena knew. It wasn't a warning. It was a command. And something inside her wanted to listen. Lena had never felt anything like it. Her body remained crouched behind the crate, her blade still gripped in her hand, but her mind drifted. Somewhere between fear and fascination, a quiet voice inside her whispered that she should stand, that she should step into the open, that she should listen. Go back. The voice had shape but no soul. It wasn't angry or hostile. It was soft. Persuasive. Artificial in its calm. Simon gripped her wrist, squeezing hard. The pressure broke the fog in her mind. She blinked and turned to him. He mouthed one word, "Run." Lena nodded. They moved fast, bolting from the crate and diving toward a rear exit half covered in shelves. The thing didn't chase them, not yet. It simply tilted its head, like it hadn't expected them to resist. They crashed through the back door, knocking over a pile of broken chairs. Dust exploded into the air. As they sprinted into the alley, Lena dared a glance over her shoulder. The mimic stood in the doorway, unmoving. Watching. It made no attempt to follow. But just before the fog swallowed it again, it raised its hand, slowly, like it was waving goodbye. Lena and Simon didn't stop running until they were 3 blocks away, lungs burning, legs shaking. The stillness of the belt closed around them once again. They collapsed behind the frame of an overturned bus. For a long time, neither spoke. Then Simon rasped, "It was mimicking us." The lullaby. The voice. That wasn't just a hollow one. That was something new. Lena nodded slowly, catching her breath. It spoke like it had watched us for a long time. Studied us. Simon looked sick. "You think that's what happened to the missing scouts?" Lena didn't answer. She already knew the truth. The hollow ones were dangerous because they were mindless. Predictable. But this? This was worse. Something intelligent. Something waiting. "We need to get back to the wall," Lena said. "Before it gets dark." They returned to the path they came from, retracing their trail to the symbol-stamped road. As they approached the spot where they'd first seen the Watcher, Lena paused. The dirt where the circle symbol had been drawn was now blank. Smoothed over. Erased. Simon swallowed hard. "They don't want us remembering." "No," Lena murmured. "They want us to forget." It was nearly dusk by the time they reached the outer wall of the dream. The fog had followed them all the way to the perimeter, pressing against the fences like an ocean swell. The guards on watch, seeing Lena and Simon emerge from the haze, scrambled to activate the gate controls. The inner chamber opened, then the secondary gate. They stumbled inside. As the doors sealed behind them, the muffled hum of the outside silence vanished. The chatter of survivors, the soft clang of tools, the barking of dogs, all rushed into Lena's ears like a warm blanket. They were back. But they weren't safe. Mara waited for them in the debriefing chamber, flanked by Jericho and 2 council scribes. Her expression tightened as she saw their condition, scratched, dirty, eyes wide with exhaustion. "Report," she said immediately. Lena didn't wait. She explained everything. The tapping. The symbols. The journal. The shelter. The mimic. When she described the voice, Jericho interrupted. "A voice? Without a mouth?" "It was, more like a suggestion than a sound," Lena said. "But it spoke clearly. It told us to go back. Twice." Mara leaned back in her chair. "We've heard stories, unconfirmed, of infected that retain some intelligence. But this is different." Simon nodded. "It watched us. It didn't attack. It played a game." A long silence followed. Then Mara said, "You're both going into quarantine." Lena blinked. "What?" "Protocol. You were exposed to an unknown. Possibly psychological. Possibly viral. 72 hours. Observation, memory logs, no contact with civilians." Simon stood. "We're not infected." "That's not what I'm worried about," Mara replied. Lena understood. If the mimic could speak like them, think like them, what else could it do? Could it copy them? Could it become them? Agreed, Lena said. Put us under. But Mara. Yes? We're not alone out there. There are others. Survivors. One of them led us to the shelter. They left signs, messages. Someone's been fighting this thing from the inside. Mara's brow furrowed. Then they're still out there? Lena nodded. And they know something we don't. That night, locked inside quarantine, Lena sat on the bunk and opened the journal again. She flipped past the notes, the diagrams, the scrawled warnings, until something new caught her eye. A page near the back had smudges, like it had been touched while wet. It was barely legible. But one line stood out. The silence is not the absence of sound. It is their signal. Their language. And beneath that, in darker ink. Don't dream. They find you when you dream. Lena stared at the words. Then, without realizing, she began to hum. The same lullaby. The one the mimic sang. And a chill ran down her spine. Lena jolted awake, gasping for breath. Her quarantine bunk was soaked in sweat. She sat up fast, blinking in the dim light, hand already reaching for her machete, except it wasn't there. Weapons weren't allowed in isolation. Just walls, surveillance, and silence. But it hadn't been the silence that woke her. It had been a voice. One she couldn't forget. Go back. Her heart thudded in her chest, not just from the echo of the nightmare, but from what she remembered, clearly, vividly, while she'd been dreaming. The fog. The symbol. The mimic's face, which hadn't moved, but watched. In the dream, it had been inside the walls. Walking among them. Smiling without lips. Wearing someone's voice like a mask. She stood and moved to the small, reinforced window. Across the compound, in the adjacent quarantine cell, Simon sat on his own bunk, eyes wide and unmoving. He looked like he hadn't slept at all. Lena knocked on the glass softly. He blinked, turned, and shook his head slowly. He'd heard it too. The next morning, Mara visited them personally. A rare occurrence. You both look like hell, she said, her tone more concerned than stern. We didn't sleep, Lena answered. Dreams. Or something like them. Same dream? Mara asked. Lena looked over at Simon's window again. The mimic. Inside the wall. Speaking through someone else. Mara's eyes narrowed. Describe it. They took turns, Lena starting with the voice, Simon following with a chilling addition. In his dream, the mimic was sitting at the council table, surrounded by the others, smiling. But no one seemed to know it wasn't human. Mara didn't respond right away. She walked to the far wall, arms crossed, processing. Then she said something they weren't expecting. You're not the first. Lena stood. What? 2 other scouts returned weeks ago from the northern rim. They reported strange symbols, movement in the distance, and a humming sound. Days later, they both broke protocol. One vanished. The other hanged himself in his bunk. Simon froze. Why didn't you say anything? Mara turned. Because we weren't sure it was real. Or if it was psychological fallout from prolonged exposure. But now it's happening again. And it's spreading. A heavy silence settled. Then Lena said, this isn't just survival anymore. Something's probing the wall. Not physically, mentally. Mara nodded slowly. And if it can get inside our heads, it can get inside us. That night, the power flickered. It started with the hallway lights, just a pulse. Then the cameras blinked out for 20 seconds. By the time backup power stabilized, the system had already flagged a breach. Not in the wall. Inside the quarantine wing. Guards stormed the corridor, only to find Lena's and Simon's cells intact, no open doors, no structural damage. But the isolation hall's final chamber, the empty one, was now occupied. A figure sat in the corner. Unarmed. Covered in dust. Wrapped in thin cloth and a hood. And humming. The figure didn't speak for over an hour. The council debated heavily about what to do. Some argued it was a hallucination, a trick played by their tired minds. Others swore they'd seen the camera's glitch, then come back showing him just there, as if he'd always been there. Mara finally gave the order, "Don't touch. Don't approach. Just monitor." But Lena couldn't sit still. She stared at the security feed from her cell, watching the figure's motionless form. Then, suddenly, he looked up, straight at the camera. Her screen flickered. And the humming stopped. A moment later, her speaker buzzed. Lena. Her blood went cold. The voice wasn't from Mara. It wasn't from any channel she recognized. It was soft, low. Familiar. You saw it. The tower. The symbol. The silence. You saw what we tried to forget. Lena backed away from the wall. Who are you? The voice paused. Then answered with something that felt like a breath against her ear. I was the first to dream. And now I am the last to wake. Lena rushed to the emergency intercom. Mara, do you hear that? Someone's on the line. The only reply was static. Then, tap, tap, tap. Lena turned slowly toward the glass. The man in the isolation chamber was no longer on the monitor. He was standing at her door. But when the guards arrived, he was gone. No broken locks. No footprints. Nothing. Only a symbol carved onto the floor just outside Lena's room. A circle. With 3 lines. And this time, beneath it, a message written in ash. You brought the silence back with you. The dream was no longer quiet. Not in the way it had been before, the peaceful kind of quiet. No, this new silence was uneasy. Every corner of the settlement pulsed with tension, like the walls themselves were holding their breath. Guards doubled their shifts. No one left the gates. And everywhere Lena walked, eyes followed her. They knew she had brought something back. Not a disease. Not a monster they could cage. But something far worse, a question with no answer. Simon sat across from her in the council chamber, his foot tapping anxiously on the stone floor. Jericho paced by the window. Elijah stared at the surveillance footage on repeat, frame by frame, watching the moment the figure vanished. He was there, Jericho said. And then he wasn't. Not possible, Elijah muttered. Nothing just disappears. Not inside the compound. Mara stood in front of the wall monitor, arms crossed, jaw tight. She hadn't slept either. None of them had. The symbol, she finally said. It's appeared 6 more times. East wall, kitchen storage, the school courtyard. No one saw who left them. They're messages, Lena said. Or warnings, Simon added. Elijah shook his head. You two need to go back into quarantine. You're compromised. Lena stood. We're not infected. We're aware. Mara raised a hand. Enough. Sit. The room stilled. Then she turned to Lena. You said someone helped guide you to the shelter. A survivor. Yes. Find them. If they're out there, they know what this thing is. And if we don't understand it soon, we're going to lose control of this place. Jericho scoffed. You want to send them back into that fog? Lena nodded. I have to. Simon leaned forward. Then I'm going too. Mara met their eyes, something unspoken passing between them. She didn't like the plan, but she also knew they had no choice. Take what you need, she said quietly. You leave before dawn. That night, Lena stood alone at the edge of the east wall. Fog was already curling between the gaps in the barricades, like it had been waiting. In the silence, she could still hear the mimic's voice playing in her head, smooth, hypnotic, wrong. Simon joined her, armed and armored. Second time's the charm? Let's hope so. The gates opened, and they vanished into the belt once more. They moved quickly, retracing their path from before, through the broken plaza, past the erased symbol, down the alley. But this time, something felt different. The air was warmer. The fog moved slower. And the silence wasn't complete. There was a sound beneath it. Faint. Repeating. A drumbeat. Simon paused. Do you hear that? Lena nodded, eyes narrowing. It's not hollow ones. Too steady. Too human. They followed the beat until they reached the old radio tower again. This time, there was no humming. No mimic. Just the building, and something new. Light. A fire, burning low inside the shelter. Lena motioned for Simon to stay low. They crept to the doorway and peeked inside. There, kneeling by the flames, was a woman. Her clothes were patchworked, face streaked with ash, eyes hollow with exhaustion, but alert. Alive. She looked up slowly. You came back, she whispered. Lena stepped inside. You led us here before. Why? The woman studied her. Because you listened. You heard the knock. Most people don't. Simon entered behind her. What is it? The mimic. The silence. What's really out here? The woman shook her head. You're asking the wrong question. Lena frowned. Then what's the right one? The woman pointed to the symbol painted on the wall. That's not a warning. It's a door. A door to what? Simon asked. To them, she said softly. To what's left. She gestured to the journal Lena had returned with. You read it. You saw the signs. The hollow ones were only the first wave. But what came after learned from them. Learned from us. They watch. They mimic. And when they understand enough. They replace, Lena whispered. The woman nodded. They don't want to kill us. They want to be us. But they don't know how to feel. So they study our pain. Our memories. Our dreams. Simon took a step back. We're not fighting monsters. We're fighting reflections. The woman leaned forward. The more you dream of them, the closer they get. Because dreams let them in. Dreams create echoes. And echoes become doors. Lena's breath caught. The people in the dream, she said slowly. They sleep. They laugh. They hope. And that's how they'll be taken, the woman whispered. A sudden gust of wind swept through the shelter, snuffing out the fire. Darkness swallowed the room in an instant. And in that darkness, the mimic's voice returned, soft and low. We're already inside. The mimic's voice rolled through the darkness like a breeze slipping through cracks in stone, calm, confident, and absolutely wrong. We're already inside. Lena reached for her flashlight, but the beam only caught shadows. The fire had gone out so completely, it was as if it had never burned. Beside her, Simon pressed his back to hers. The survivor, the woman, had vanished into the dark. We're not alone, Simon whispered. We never were, Lena said quietly. The shelter felt smaller now. The walls seemed closer, as though something unseen breathed against them, reshaping them from within. Footsteps echoed where no one walked. A low hum began again, not from one throat, but many. Dozens. Layers of voices weaving into each other. A choir of stolen sound. Then came the tapping. Not on the ground this time, but in their minds. Tap. 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 Lena clenched her teeth. We need to move. Now. They ran out of the shelter, the fog closing in fast behind them. No shapes gave chase. No figures stepped into the road. But the feeling, that feeling, was everywhere. Not of being followed. Not even of being hunted. Of being understood. Like the things in the mist already knew how this would end. Simon gasped as they reached the edge of the plaza. What if it's too late? What if the woman was right? They're learning from us. Lena slowed to a stop, turning to face him. They're not just learning. They're using what they've learned. The lullaby. The voice. They knew what would scare us, what would familiarize them. Simon pointed through the fog. Look. Through the haze, the wall of the dream appeared, just barely. But something was wrong. A crowd stood just outside the gates. Dozens of people. Motionless. Silent. Their backs to Lena and Simon. Faces toward the wall. Like statues placed with purpose. Lena's blood froze. That's not possible. They crept closer, staying low behind a collapsed pipe. As the mist parted slightly, Lena could see it more clearly. It wasn't a crowd. It was a mirror. Each one of the figures looked exactly like someone from inside the dream, people Lena recognized. The baker. The teacher. The boy who ran messages. They were standing perfectly still, facing the settlement. And in the front row, arms at her sides, mouth slightly parted in a silent breath, was Lena. Simon cursed under his breath. They've copied everyone. Lena stared at the doppelganger. It didn't blink. It didn't move. But it radiated something worse than hostility, intent. They don't need to get through the walls, Lena whispered. They just need to convince us they're already in. Suddenly, alarms blared inside the compound. Spotlights snapped on, flooding the area with harsh light. The gates rattled. Voices shouted from inside. The mimic Lenas, the mimic Simons, the hollow-eyed imitations of every citizen, they didn't flinch. But one of them began to hum. The lullaby. Lena stood slowly, hands raised. We have to stop this. Right now. Before they let them in. Simon grabbed her arm. We go to the council. No one opens that gate. They ran to the entrance, yelling into the cameras, flashing their IDs. A moment later, the inner gate opened just wide enough to admit them. Inside, chaos. People were shouting. Some had weapons drawn. Others cried. The footage of the mimics had reached the command center. They're here, someone shouted. They followed the scouts. No, Lena yelled, forcing her way to the control room. They didn't follow us. They were always coming. This is their method: replication, confusion, infiltration. But they don't attack until we let them in. Mara turned from the monitors, pale. What are they? Echoes, Lena said. Dreams twisted into form. They watched us long enough to become us. But they still don't know how to feel. That's their weakness. Jericho scoffed. Weakness? You call that a weakness? They've got copies of our entire community standing at the gate. No, Lena said. They only have copies of what we show them. Silence fell. Then she added, we stop dreaming. We stop giving them anything to mimic. No songs. No bedtime stories. No images of comfort. We starve their reflection. Mara looked uncertain. You're talking about ending the only thing that's kept us human. I'm talking about survival, Lena said. Outside, the figures began to move, just slightly. Heads tilting. Fingers twitching. Like puppets waiting for a string to be pulled. Mara made her decision. Seal the gates. Power down external signals. Post guards at every entry point. Anne. She turned to Lena. You and Simon. You're on watch. Lena nodded. As night fell, the dream went dark for the first time in years. No singing. No stories. No dreams. And outside, the mimics waited. Silent. Watching. And learning. The end.